It's the Blue Vote Cafe, a little bit wonkish, a whole lot of fun. I'm David Schellenberg along with Rachel Oikster. We are the co-chairs for Democrats Abroad in Canada's capital region in Ottawa. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, David. How are you?
Not so bad. What have you been up to today?
Oh, that's such a good question. Oh, sorry.
Was it tough? I'm sorry to throw a tough one at you.
I've been doing a sensitivity read on a manuscript. Oh. I've been learning lines. I had a video call with my sisters.
Right.
How about you?
Well, we're recording this on World Press Freedom Day, and here in Ottawa,
Right.
I was at the World Press Freedom Luncheon. And it was very interesting. There was a keynote speaker by a woman by the name of Maria Risa from the Philippines. And she starts off her presentation with, I might be arrested a week from now. So, and just talking about press freedoms around the world and how lucky a lot of us are to live in countries where there is the freedom of the press that we enjoy.
Absolutely. Nothing like starting off with a high-stakes intro, right?
Yes, exactly. And like I said, we're recording this today, May the 3rd. So I don't know. I hope she's not in prison in a week.
Well, we can check our calendars on May 10. I hope not, too.
Yes, exactly. Who's with us today, Rachel?
Today, we're going to talk with Rob Carolina. Rob is the General Counsel to the UK Country Committee for DA. He's advised DA on parliamentary matters, and we're going to ask him everything he knows about Robert's Rules of Order. Welcome, Rob.
Oh, yeah. Hello. Everything I know about Robert's Rules of Order. After those 3 minutes are done, we'll have a lot of time to chat and catch up.
Oh, we're going to dig a little deeper than that, I think.
Please do. Please do.
But we'd like to start off by getting to know you a little bit.
Sure.
We'd love to know what state you vote in and what brought you to the UK and what keeps you there.
I vote in the state of Ohio, where I was born and raised. What brought me to the UK, after I finished law school at Georgetown in Washington, D.C., I came here to do a Master of Laws degree in International Business Law at London School of Economics.
Oh, cool.
That was supposed to be a one-year adventure 30 years ago. So through a series of well-planned accidents, something has either gone drastically wrong or pretty right.
Yes, indeed.
I know that feeling. That's how I ended up in Ottawa from Winnipeg. I thought I'd be here a year, and 20-something years later, still here. Keep thinking all those
extensions just happen.
Yes.
They do.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
We came to Canada for a 4 or 5 year experiment, and almost 30 years later, we're still here.
Still here.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. So, Robert's Rules. What do we want to know about them, David? Everything.
Well, so whenever Democrats Abroad has a great big meeting, there's people connecting in the room and from around the world, and there's always got to be some sort of way to control the conversation to make sure that everybody has a turn to speak. And this thing called Robert's Rules. And not everybody understands it, and I think some people just think it's less of rules and more of witchcraft. So. So Robert, give us how do you start with explaining Robert's Rules to somebody?
How do you start? Well, I mean, once upon a time, there was a guy named General Robert who came up with these things. He was a general during the Civil War and after. He was an engineer. And he apparently, appreciated efficiency and was trying to find a way to help people to deliberate with each other in an efficient manner, time of great growth in the American story. And so he started looking around for, common threads of what we know as parliamentary law. And parliamentary law is just that body of law that is said to govern how a deliberative assembly runs itself. Mm-hmm. So that's the start. We'll start with that.
So, and any time when you have a meeting with Robert's Rules, how does the conversation, how does the debate about a particular topic begin?
Well, I mean, a debate about any topic begins with what's called the main motion. So although it doesn't have to, I mean, sometimes in a meeting, and you'll see this happen in Democrats Abroad quite a lot in various informal meetings, committee meetings, you'll just sit down and you'll say, oh, we want to report about this, or have you heard about that? Or, did you see this thing in the news? Or, oh, we need to talk about this other issue. I mean, nothing in that really starts to trigger a deep engagement with Robert's Rules. It's when it comes time to have a discussion, a debate, and try to find agreement about taking action, that Roberts really becomes important. Because the question becomes, well, how do we as a group decide to do something? I suppose I'll start with this. This is one of the main things to understand, is that there's a very big difference between just a given executive official making a decision on their own, because sometimes constitutionally you see that, the President of the United States has certain delegated powers and can make certain decisions on his own, one day on her own. But there's, it's happening. It's going to happen. But when a group makes a decision, whether it's the Congress or the Parliament or a committee or a board of directors or the DPCA, the question becomes, how do we know what that group wants? How do you act as a group? How do you make a decision as a group? And when you have to make a decision as a group, part of the art is to try to figure out how to moderate discussion so that everyone who deserves to be heard can be heard, and that we don't end up in a situation where a few people are running roughshod over the entire operation. So Robert's Rules is this, and any system of parliamentary law, is this effort to try to balance the rights of individual members of a body with the responsibilities and rights of the body as a whole.
Right. So,
gosh, that is so theoretical. My Lord. I mean, I feel like I've drifted into like a sophomore philosophy class. Gee whiz!
Yes.
It's like I'm falling asleep to the sound of my own voice. Let's get down to something real soon, please.
Well, I was going to say, does something come to mind that would make it more concrete?
Yes. Well, let me put this example. So I want to change the name of the Blue Vote Cafe to Dave is Super Smart. And I will put forward a motion, and what's the first thing I need to put this motion towards the body to have this discussion about changing the name of the Blue Vote Cafe?
Well, the first question you have to ask is whether or not the body needs to agree to it. So there's a meta question,
right?
Well,
so I mean, if this is a one-person operation and the one person gets to choose unilaterally, you don't have to ask the body anything. You just make your decision, you change the name and whatever.
Right.
However, if the three of us are a committee and we have agreed amongst ourselves that we will only change the name of this podcast, only the group can make a change. Okay, so now we have this little tiny group of three people, and collectively we have to make a change. So what you do is you say, I make a motion that we change the name of the podcast from the first thing that I said to the second thing that I said.
Right.
And technically, you'd have to get, obviously this is easier to do when you got 300 people than with 3. You would need at least one other person to second that motion. Now, once the motion has been made and seconded, that is the business that sits in front of the body. That is what we're talking about. That's the subject under discussion. That's the debate. Nobody go off the rails. We're not talking about what time are we taking lunch or what are we going to do next week. No, it's the only debate we're having is what's the name of this podcast.
Right.
And we all focus on that.
But that's how you get started. But there are ways that discussion seems to go off the rails from there. When I propose an amendment that the podcast be called Rachel is Super Smart.
Yeah, so
and then require a seconder from that, and then you say, Rob, but we've already wasted 15 minutes of this podcast on this discussion. So
I don't think you can. But I don't think you can propose an amendment until we have debated the initial resolution.
Well, let's ask.
Not really.
Parliamentarian.
No. The motion to amend can be made as near as I can tell. Basically, so long as you've got the motion before the body, and that's what's being debated, you can make a motion to amend that pretty much any time you like. Okay. And now the motion to amend becomes the thing that's in front of the body.
Yes. Right. Now this is where people are I'm sure become convinced it's all witchcraft, because all of a sudden we were debating this one resolution and now an amendment to the resolution comes along. And this is where I have seen people in meetings get hopelessly confused as to what's going on. So how do you keep this straight in your head?
Well, I'll give you a little clue, which is I don't. What I do, and what I did last August for the DPCA meeting when Will Backer and I both served as parliamentarians in shifts during the course of the 2-day meeting, is I created a spreadsheet so that I could keep track of exactly where we were in the meeting. So, I mean, I'm just having a look at my records of that meeting, and we had, in the course of 2 days, we had a total of 33 motions that had to be considered. So what was critical is just realizing where you were. So, I'm looking here. I'll give you a typical example. Resolution 20 and Resolution 19 were both very, very hotly debated. If you were at that meeting, you recall those. I won't mention the subject matter because I'll get the subject matter wrong and I'll make somebody annoyed, and I don't want to. So Resolution 20 came along. Everyone knew it was going to be really hot. The main motion was made at a certain time, and that was the motion before the body. And then what happened is we had another motion came along. A motion was made to postpone consideration of that resolution indefinitely. The motion to postpone indefinitely. Now that then became
was that an amendment or was that another motion?
No. That's not an amendment. That's not an amendment. That's very, very different. That's different.
Because it's a recognized thing that exists in Robert's Rules that you can just do?
Yep, it's a recognized thing.
Oh, okay.
There's something like, I mean, my table of amendments from Roberts that I have, my little ready reckoner, there's about 99 different types of motion that you can make under Robert's Rules.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, some of them are so exotic that, I can't imagine them ever coming up. The ones that usually come up, obviously the main motion has to come up. A motion to amend comes up. So early in the meeting, for example, last August, we had a motion to adopt the agenda. The first thing we had was somebody said, well, I make a motion to amend the agenda to do something like this. Now, that amendment was discussed for a while. Eventually, it was put to a vote, and that amendment lost. And then someone else said, well, I'd like to make a different motion to amend the agenda. And that was discussed for a while, and that motion to amend the agenda was adopted. There was a third motion that came from somebody I noted in Canada to amend the agenda, a third motion to amend. That was discussed for a while, and that was not adopted. That lost. But ultimately, after those three motions to amend were discussed and briefly, the original motion to adopt the agenda was approved. And so, boom, you've finished the main motion. You've had a motion to amend, it lost. Another motion to amend, it wins. Another motion to amend, that lost. Are we done with amendments? Does anybody else have anything they want to amend on this agenda? Because, ultimately, the agenda belongs to the body. The body gets to decide how we're going to spend our time together. You can't impose on them. They have to agree to it. So we had those three motions to amend. 2 failed, 1 succeeded. And I was like, anybody else got anything you want to say? Seriously? Looking around. Last call. Okay, so then you say, at that point, everyone was kind of exhausted and said, yeah, we'll just take the agenda as is. Bang, main motion done. Now you go on to the next main motion. And you see the meeting moves from main motion to main motion to main motion.
Right.
And there are little bits and pieces in between, little interstitial moments in between main motions. But once you're into a main motion, there's all sorts of stuff that can happen.
Now, when you propose an amendment, this just comes out of the blue at any moment. You can just arbitrarily say, I'd like to propose an amendment, and everybody has to stop and listen to your amendment.
Well, I mean, you can propose an amendment so long as you get the attention of the chair, so long as you're assigned the floor. And don't forget, the role of the presiding officer is to play traffic cop in the meeting.
Right.
So you can't just, go nuts. I mean, you have to be recognized. You have to put your hand up and say, I want to make a motion. It's like, well, okay. You have to actually state what's on your mind and, spit it out. I saw 1 or 2 examples last year where someone thought they had a motion to make, and they made such a big introductory speech that they ran out of time before they could make their motion, which is I mean, I don't want to pick on those folks, but I would call that a rookie mistake. If you have a motion you want to make, then make the motion.
Right.
And that is, I'd like to amend this by doing thus and such, or I'd like to defer this indefinitely, postpone it indefinitely, or I'd like to refer this to a committee, or I'd like to do something else. I mean, when I held parliamentarian a workshop like a week before the meeting, and somebody asked me, "So what are the different ways you can kill a resolution?"
Oh,
I said, "Really?" I said, "You really want to know that?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "All right. Well, here's a bunch of different ways I can think of." So it's like I don't know why you want, because these people had a resolution they wanted to adopt. I said, "I'm not sure why you want a tutorial on how to kill it, but all right, sure. Here you go. Here's like 4 different ways I can think of to kill a resolution."
Wow.
And that I've seen used. So,
But if there's a lineup of people who want to speak about the main motion and somebody wants to propose an amendment, can they jump ahead of the people who just want to speak about the main motion to make that amendment, or do they have to wait till their turn comes along?
Normally they have to wait till their turn comes along. I mean, for a motion to amend, I think that's the usual approach in situations like this. I can't think of a reason why they would be allowed to accelerate or jump the queue.
Right.
For an amendment.
Although that does raise a point, because in preparation for this, I did decide I thought I would sketch out some of my pet peeves for things that go wrong.
Ooh, thank you.
No, not a problem. Well, hey, I like to do my homework. It's like so. I mean, there are things that a lot of people often get wrong. And one of them that comes up is what I would call the misuse of either a point of order or a point of information, or something like that, or a parliamentary inquiry, a privileged, some sort of privileged motion.
Or clarification.
Yeah, exactly. There's all sorts of things that people kind of have a little bit of understanding of, where they think, oh, if I say this, suddenly I get to jump to the head of the queue and say something.
Right.
I mean, so a point of order is really meant to be, it's kind of like if you were in a courtroom, it would be a bit like saying objection. That's not how things are supposed to work. Something has just gone wrong. So raising a point of order is supposed to draw to the attention of the presiding officer that, foul, there's a flag on the play. Which sports metaphor can we adopt here? Because I'm bad at all. I guess we'll use Canadian football. Yeah, there's a flag on the play, okay? And so we're going to review it, and you have to explain what you think went wrong. Well, some people just say, "Oh, point of order. That guy's a jerk." It's like, no, that's not really a point of order. You're just like throwing stones at people. You're supposed to explain your objection and why you think the rules have been violated, and allow the presiding officer to figure it out. But the one that I think most often confused is when people use the phrase point of information.
Okay.
Oh my heavens, things go really badly wrong on this regularly. And that's because they might mean a bunch of different things. Okay. Sometimes they're making what Roberts calls a parliamentary inquiry. And that is, excuse me, Madam Chair, I'd just like to understand, where are we in the process?
Right.
Are we debating an amendment to the main motion, or is this an amendment to the amendment? Can you clarify how much time is left on the clock? I mean, those are all legitimate parliamentary inquiries, asking the chair to clarify something, to give their opinion about where we are. But what most people will do with a point of information is they'll abuse it, and they'll use it just as an excuse to jump the queue and make a speech. And that is, I have a point of information. What's your point of information? I want to know if so-and-so has considered, the person proposing this has considered that the way they're doing this is the wrong way to do it. And if they did it this other way, that would be the right way to do it. And it's like, no, hang on a second. Hang on. Whoa, slow your roll. All you did was just make a speech. That's not a point of information. So a genuine... Say, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so if you are the parliamentarian, then your job at that moment is to say, out of order, or?
Absolutely not. No. See, people also misunderstand the role of the parliamentarian.
Oh, okay.
Let me tell you how much.
Chair's job.
Exactly. Let me tell you how much power the parliamentarian has. The answer is absolutely zero.
Okay.
Zero power. In a physical meeting, the ideal role is that a parliamentarian is someone who should barely be seen and not be heard. Because you're the kind of person who should be sitting next to the chair, next to the presiding officer. You kind of give them a little soft elbow. You lean over, you whisper into their ear. You give them a little bit of direction or advice. You make a suggestion to them, or if you see something that goes off the rails, you kind of like whisper into their ear about something's going wrong. The problem is when we're online, it's almost impossible to replicate that kind of close physical proximity. Right. So there have been times, and I did it a couple times last August and a couple times in other DA meetings that happened online, where I said, excuse me, Madam Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, there is a consideration. There's something I'd like you to take into consideration. In one case, I actually said, perhaps the meeting could stand at ease while we confer, and I actually go offline and call them to talk to them about what my concern is about what just happened.
Stand at ease.
Yep. That's what a meeting can do if you got nothing to do. Stand at ease.
Stand at ease.
Well, it's a thing. It's a thing.
It's lovely.
Clearly, it stems
I'm not going to make that up, am
it's
I?
not smoke them if you got them, but it sounds like the similar sort of thing.
It sounds to me like it reflects Robert's military background.
It probably does, but it's also a nice way to encapsulate what we're doing. And when the meeting stands at ease, the main thing is no one's supposed to rush the microphone and make speeches. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're having a pause. It's something less than a recess, right? But it's still a pause.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, if you formally recess the meeting, you say, look, we're going to take a 10-minute recess unless anybody objects. And then everyone can run away for 10 minutes and no business can take place during a programmed recess. But for the meeting to stand at ease, it's just sort of like, hey, everybody just, calm down. No one's got the microphone. No one's got the floor. We're just having a little bit of a consultation up here and we'll come back to you. Mm-hmm. I don't hear the phrase used very often, but technically that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So getting back to this idea of a point of information.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
It already feels like
I can tell.
I can
tell there's something
already.
to say.
Yes.
Well, tangents. Oh my heavens. No, then you must call for the orders of the day. If you think we're going off on a tangent, your remedy is to say, I call for the orders of the day, which is to say, what's our agenda? I say, I'd like to gently remind the chair that we have an agenda, and could we please get back to it? Mm-hmm. I call for the orders of the day.
Okay.
So now my question to you, sir, is did we establish an agenda at the beginning of this discussion? I don't think we did. I think you'll discover as a result there can't possibly be a tangent in this conversation because we have not yet plotted a path.
Aha!
Now, if you want to propose a path and you want to propose an agenda, we can have a discussion about that and adopt an agenda.
Only once we define the members of the body, Rob.
But if we, that too. But if we do that, everyone will get bored.
Yeah, don't we still have a motion on the floor to change the name of the podcast?
Do we still? Oh my heavens!
But I don't think we did because we never had a seconder to get it. So the discussion.
We didn't. No, you're absolutely right.
And it was theoretical. You never actually proposed it.
It falls to the floor.
I know you want to. Yes, it falls to the floor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Before we get to that, so did we cover all your list of things that annoy you with?
Oh, pet peeves.
Oh gosh, no. I mean, the thing that I was leading up to is that with a point of information, there are a couple of ways that it can be used properly. And that is if you want to propose a question to the chair, a factual question. A point of information, can you just remind us how much money we have in the Treasury? Mm-hmm. Point of information, can you just remind us, please, when is the deadline for the delegate selection plan to be submitted to the DNC? Mm-hmm. Just so we know. So you're talking to the chair, and the chair has to source the answer. The other way to address a question, and this is almost never properly used in the DPCA and really can't be used because of our short debate cycle, is when you're interrupting someone speaking. Will the member yield for a question? That's a type of point of information. Will the member yield for a question? Now, if you're in a society where people are giving 5, 10, 15, 20-minute long speeches,
right,
it might make perfect sense once you're 10 minutes into it to entertain a question rather than wait until the end of your talk. But here's the thing.
What's a question?
Anything. Okay. Will the speaker yield for a question? And then it's up to the person speaking. Yes, I'd be happy to take a question from Ms. So-and-so.
Right.
And at that point, the person says, well, have you considered, does your motion consider this, or does your resolution consider, does your amendment, how would your amendment approach this problem or that problem or the other problem?
Right.
That's my question.
Right.
Now, that's legitimate dialogue when the speaker yields to the question, but here's why it's never used. Mm-hmm. In DPCA, and that's because that dialogue counts against the time of the speaker.
Oh.
Right.
They're eating into their own time. So one of the abuses of point of information is to just jump the queue and make a speech, and this person just grabs extra floor time and gets ahead of the queue. And the other one is to ask a question to somebody who is not speaking and to somebody who is not the chair. I have a point of information. Could Mr. Carolina please answer, give his opinion about why this and such and thus and so happens and blah, 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 blah. That's absolutely inappropriate. And there have been a couple of times in the last meeting where those kinds of moves were ruled out of order.
Great. Yes, the clock is quite entertaining in this. As a person who was keeping time in the last meeting, and you're given this assignment of when the clock hits 3 minutes, you play a sound and the debate ends. And even though you sort of think in my head, well, they got interrupted and there was an amendment and then something else happened in the middle of it, but nevertheless the 3 minutes ran up, and so this person's time is over, and that's the way it is.
Well, I mean, those were the rules that we chose to adopt at the beginning of the last DPCA meeting. And this is something where the DPCA has actually matured a bit since I first started attending meetings about a dozen years ago. And that is, it used to be there were no programmed limitations on talking time at all.
Okay.
And so, and when you have that, the risk that you run is somebody decides to try to get their own way by just running out the clock. Some people are able to talk for 5 minutes straight without stopping, and then they get three of their friends to do the same, and the next thing you know, you just lose the will to live. So one of the practices that has come up in the last, I'd say, about 5 years, probably a little less, is this idea of adopting at the beginning of a meeting, here's a set of rules we're going to adhere to during the course of this meeting. And so the rules that we had last time had time limits on how long could we spend on a main motion, where that time limit included both the main motion as well as amendments, because some people would otherwise you'd get a series of amendments that would just be used to extend time. And the theory was once the clock ran out, under those rules, the way we adopted them, the way the bodies chose to adopt them, approve them, was that once that clock ran out, then the chair was required to just end debate. And, where are we? Well, we're debating an amendment to a main motion. All right, well, now we're going to have a vote on the amendment to the amendment, and up or down. Fine. If it passes, it fails. Now we back up and we're going to have the vote on the amendment. Can we do more debate? No, because the clock is for everything, including the subsidiary motions. We vote on that and back out. And then we come up to the main motion, whatever's left, and we vote on that if necessary. So the idea is that, we're only going to spend a certain amount of time on this particular piece of business, and when we get to the end of that clock, then we're just going to take the votes and we're going to move on. Because one of the frustrating things in the past is that people would run out the clock and they say, oh gosh, look at the time, gee whiz, no time to take a vote, oh dear, on to the next thing. And that was very frustrating to people, and I can understand why it would be, because it is.
Right.
Yeah, so when the clock runs out, that doesn't mean that we automatically take a vote. That just means that everything we had allocated for this particular motion is gone, and if we never got to the vote, it's gone?
Well, under the basic, that depends on where we are procedurally under Roberts. If we are in a meeting that has, let's say a meeting that has no guardrails, okay? Let's just say we start a meeting, and here's a list of 5 things on our agenda. We have no programmed stop time. We have no program hard-coded stop times in between agenda items. Well, the meeting just goes. The meeting goes until it's adjourned.
Oh, my goodness.
The meeting just continues until it's adjourned or until it's recessed.
Right.
So we've been going for 8 hours. We've been going for 10 hours. We've been going for 11 hours.
Yeah.
Well, so long as you still have a quorum, you still have a meeting, you still have a debate, there's nothing going to stop it. So you can't run. There's no clock to run out. The only time you have a clock to run out is if the meeting itself decides we're going to impose upon ourselves a clock that can be run out. So we're going to decide as a matter of procedure to fix a time for adjournment. Yes. And we're going to write that down, and everyone's going to agree to it. Now, if you do nothing more than that, if you get to the time fixed for adjournment and you haven't been able to resolve a motion or something, everything just evaporates and disappears, and you all go home and wait for the next meeting.
Right.
But what we did with the last set of rules was we did first, let's impose on ourselves a time discipline so that we know when the clock runs out. But when the clock runs out, what we're going to do is we're going to take a vote on anything pending and back out from there, and we won't be done until we've done those votes. No more debate, just the votes. Now, all of this, everything that I just said, is 100% contingent on what is adopted or what is agreed at the beginning of a DPCA meeting. Because this is not hard-coded into the bylaws. It's not hard-coded into any other standing rules of procedure for the DPCA. But it has become a custom to adopt rules like this. And, if we're firing on all cylinders, if we're all doing our jobs right, then people who are interested in the meeting will hopefully have an opportunity to discuss and talk about what those rules should look like, so that you don't end up in a big bun fight over what the rules should say, because that in and of itself will take an hour or two.
A bun fight?
You've never
sorry, it's a British thing. It's a British thing. It's like, oh, Jerry, we're going to be in a bun fight now.
You actually hear it in Canada too.
As in like a bun, a dinner roll?
Like throwing dinner rolls at each other.
Precisely. We're at a formal event. We're not throwing knives at each other. We're throwing buns.
Buns. Okay.
It's a very low stakes war.
Well,
Serious,
democracy in
not,
action. Yeah.
That's right. Serious but not damaging.
There you go.
So I'm embarrassed because I think I should know this, but I imagine in our charter we say that our meetings are conducted by Robert's rules. Is that the case?
Section 10.1, Parliamentary Authority, states in full, the rules contained in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order newly revised shall govern in all cases to which they are applicable and in which they are not inconsistent with this charter or any special rules of order that DPCA may adopt, full stop.
So that's what allows us to say we're not going to do 100% Robert's rules. We're going to put a bit of a time limit on our...
Well, no, that's the provision that says that the default rule for everything we do is Robert's rules.
Right. Unless we otherwise
decide.
But
Robert's rules itself also has rules about how you deviate from Robert's rules.
That was my question. That was exactly my question.
The one that people are probably most familiar with is the motion to suspend the rules. A motion to suspend the rules can be made to accommodate a number of things. Most commonly in the DPCA, if people are really being punctilious about holding everyone to account, is when you have someone who's not a member who wants to speak.
Right.
And historically, this happens at DPCA meetings with some frequency, particularly when we back in the days, back in the olden times when we flew to places and met in person. You would have local volunteers who would attend the meeting, but they weren't a member of the DPCA, and they would get really excited and enthused, and they'd want to speak. Well, there's a rule that every parliamentary body in the world tends to follow, and that is you're only allowed to address the body if you're a member.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's it. You don't make speeches in Congress unless you're a member of Congress.
Yes.
So when somebody like that who's not a member comes forward, technically what you're doing is you're asking the members to suspend the rules and allow this very nice person to make a speech. Now, if everyone just says, sure, I'm happy with that, that's fine. But if somebody objects and wants to put it to a vote, suspending the rules like that requires a 2/3 vote.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because the person running the meeting will just often ask for what? Unanimous support or something?
Unanimous consent. You can do most things that you want to do. If you've got unanimity, if nobody objects, it's not a problem. There's a very, very, very small number of things that cannot be done with unanimous consent. Like I'd like to ask unanimous consent to amend a whole section of the bylaws that nobody knew we were going to be talking about. Now,
right.
That's an absolute non-starter. Something super constitutional like that.
Right.
But otherwise, unanimous consent can really get you over almost any hurdle. Or another way to think of unanimous consent is lack of objection. If you just say something, if you just do something, it's like, oh, we'd now like to hear from Ms. Johnson. Nobody objects. Who cares? It's like, if no one points out that Ms. Johnson is not a member, who cares? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's like if nobody objects, then that's the equivalent of everybody having consented.
Right.
So there's a lot of times when you're chairing a meeting, if you're going to chair a meeting under Roberts, particularly a large, complex meeting like DPCA meetings, sometimes the quickest way to get through something is to just let it happen.
Yeah.
Just let it happen. And see if a member objects. See if there is an objection. And if there is an objection, then you deal with it.
Well, we were discussing this the other day. That's how daylight saving time passed.
Oh, I heard something about this, but I haven't tuned into it. Lord have mercy.
It was one of those things where it got put to a motion and asked for unanimous consent, and sort of nobody understood this debate was happening at this particular moment, and nobody put up their hand, and so boom, it passed. And 3 weeks of discussion didn't happen, and then it was over in 5 seconds.
I think
that
it was
can
packed
happen
in
sometimes.
with other things, right? It's a big bundle of stuff, and daylight savings happens to be one of them, and they just don't happen to notice that it's there.
Well, I'll tell you what, if a motion to amend daylight savings time comes before the DPCA, I think we'll pay much closer attention to it.
Right. Now voting. So in sort of the way that it goes through, any single motion ends with a vote. And what? People call for the question. We hear this.
The previous question. Well, basically, when the presiding officer feels like everybody has everyone's spent. It's like, are you all exhausted now? Have you had enough? It's like, seriously.
You've all said your piece.
You usually sort of get a feel for that. I mean, if you've got the luxury of time, you get a feel for when things have kind of slowed down. And when you're chairing a meeting, you can just say, very well, I'm going to call a vote. Now, if they say that, if a chair says that, somebody can say, well, wait a minute, I don't think we're ready for a vote. Mm-hmm. The alternative way that we can handle this is somebody comes along and they individually think, well, the heck with this. I know I'm done. Hopefully all my friends are too. Yeah. You can just make a motion. It's like, and that, Madam Chair, is why I now call the question. That's a motion. Okay. Now here's a trick. Shutting down debate generally is something that's disfavored. Roberts and parliamentary law tends to lean in the direction of letting people talk. Mm-hmm. So anything that says you're not allowed to talk anymore usually is not the sort of thing that's favored. Mm-hmm. So a motion to call the question, to take a vote, you might just go immediately to it. But if somebody objects and says, no, I want to vote on this, okay, then forcing a vote to happen requires a 2/3 vote. Mm-hmm. You have to have 2/3 of the people in the room who say, yeah, I'm sick of this too. I think we're ready to take a vote on the thing. 2/3. The theory is that if you can get 2/3 of the people to say, I think we're done talking, then you're probably that's probably a good sign that people are talked out.
Are ready to vote. Because we have seen this where a discussion will be happening, and then somebody out of the blue, and you sort of get the feeling they feel that the discussion is not going the way they want it to go. And if they end the conversation now, they'll probably get the motion passed. And you'll hear out of the blue this shout, I want to call the question. And everything stops. Like, is that the way that this works?
Yep. If they're recognized. I mean, here's the thing. Here's where life gets a little bit tricky. I mean, you're only supposed to, with some exceptions, you're only supposed to be making motions like this when you've been assigned the floor. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when I've done this at a DPCA meeting in the past, and I'll never forget the first time I did it back in 2011, because the guy behind me in the speaking queue, I thought, oh Lord, if he gets a hold of the microphone, we're going to be here for another half an hour.
Yes.
And
yeah.
The guys and the guy was really kind of getting on my nerves anyway, and I think he's getting on everybody's nerves. So I think I'm going to put this to the test. He's standing right behind me. He's already spoken twice, and in the earlier days we weren't really very disciplined. And I said, so I made my points and blah 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 blah, and we should do this, and we should do this. And Mr. Chairman, that's why I now call the question. And the guy behind me said, "Oh crap! I could just see his face exploding. Oh darn it! Yeah." But I mean, at that point, everybody was exhausted, and nobody was questioning whether or not there was time to take the vote.
Right.
But I thought, this is a great button on a speech. It's a great way to end a speech is to, it's like, I believe this, I believe this, and I believe that, and I think we should go to the moon, and that's why I call the question. Okay. Oh, okay. So now it's time to vote. If you're going to do it now, the problem, of course, if the time is about to run out anyway, and you call, and now here's the problem with it in sort of the modern version of what DPCA does, and here's why it's very disfavored. And if my good friend Will Backer were on the call, I think he would be the first to make this point. And it's a very good point. So he's not here. I respect him tremendously. So let me make a very good point on this, and that is when we do have a clock running. Okay, when the clock is running down anyway, if there's only 2.5 minutes left on the clock, why in God's name would you call the call? Why in heaven's name would you do it? There's only 2.5 minutes on the clock.
Yeah.
2.5 minutes are going to pass. It's going to force the vote anyway. You call the question. It becomes contentious. We have to take a roll call vote. That takes 20 minutes.
Right.
So why bother?
Yeah.
Why bother? I mean, so long as we have a clock running and everybody agrees how the clock is working, why would you ever need to call the question? Is the argument?
Yeah,
I think it's a good argument.
And that's sort of where I was going with it. Calling the question itself puts forward a set of a sequence, and it starts with a roll call and then a 2/3 vote to just decide if we're actually going to vote on the motion.
Well, it doesn't have to. I mean, you only end up in the voting situation if somebody who wants to speak says, screw that, I want to talk.
Right.
That's when you have to go to the vote.
Okay.
Right.
So if somebody objects, but I mean, in the case that I mentioned, like all the way back in the before time, back in the Pleistocene X period, DPCA, when I did that to that guy who I can still see his face right now. He was a very, very active person at the time. I liked him. He's a decent guy, but even so, he knew he'd been had.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't even object to calling the question. He knew that people were ready to vote. He could sense it too.
Yeah.
When you're in the room and people are kind of talked out, and he was the only person left, and like there's a person behind him. We'd all had a turn. Everybody had been at bat. We'd all talked ourselves blue in the face. So he didn't even bother to object or call a question to call a formal vote. We just went straight to the vote.
Mm-hmm.
Went straight to the vote.
Now, one of the things we hear all the time too is point of order.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, it's like objection. We talked about this. We touched on it briefly earlier, which is, that's when somebody feels that the rules have not been adhered to, and it's something to be used with a bit of circumspection, and you have to be kind of clear about why you're raising it. But equally, here's the thing. Sometimes stuff happens in a meeting, and this happens to me a lot, because once you start to learn these rules, you start to see all sorts of stuff that's not done strictly according to the rules. And you have to stop and ask yourself the question, why do I want to object to this? Mm-hmm. What am I going to accomplish? Mm-hmm. What's the point? Mm-hmm. I could make a point of order right now. I could hold everybody's feet to the fire. I could get into a big drawn-out debate about you should do something this way instead of that way. But it's like, you're looking at the meeting, you're looking at the flow of the conversation, and you're thinking, and you think, why should I bother? Mm-hmm. What's the point? This isn't going to prejudice the operation of democracy. It's not going to prejudice the operation of the meeting. It's a rather minor point. So let it go. I mean, for example, the chair recognizes somebody who's not a member to speak, okay? I see somebody who's recognized to speak. They're not a member of the DPCA. I know they're not a member of the DPCA. Nobody has asked for the rules to be suspended. I could immediately make a point of order. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. The person is not a member of the body and is not allowed to speak unless there's a motion to suspend the rules. Why in God's name would I do that?
Right.
I mean, if we're in the right spirit of collaboration and things are moving in the right way, we've got the benefit of time. There's nothing. All you do is make a lot of enemies doing that. Mm-hmm. Now, admittedly, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking, so do you think I'm just thinking about the difference between blind adherence to these rules, which somebody might feel they were required to raise a point of order, or are they really just basically a safety net?
I do think of them primarily as a safety net, and they're supposed to be a safety net for democracy. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to balance the rights and responsibilities of the different members of a deliberative assembly. They're supposed to balance rights and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to make sure that people who want to be heard have a chance to be heard in the right way. It's supposed to make sure that we're not wasting people's time by deviating from whatever agenda that we as the body have agreed we're going to be adhering to. It's meant to make sure that the person who is running the meeting is acting as a genuine neutral facilitator of discussion and not a discussant themselves. Mm-hmm. Because if they decide they want to take a view on something, then Robert says they're supposed to step out of the chair and hand the gavel to somebody else.
Yes,
to preside.
Yes, we've seen that too. But just to go back to point of order, because
are you raising a point of order here? Is this what this is?
Yes, apparently. Well,
so could you please state your point of order and we'll see what we can do with it.
Now, I guess my point of order is a point of order can be done at any time to interrupt anything that's happening.
Well, it should be done promptly after an infraction of the rules.
Can be.
Well, it depends. I mean, how sticky are we going to get? I mean, it depends. It depends. It depends on the violation that you see.
Okay.
It depends on the violation.
So what are good times to make a point of order?
Well, one of my favorite is when somebody just blatantly jumps the queue with a point of information that's completely out of order. That's always a fun time. I've actually used that. I've actually raised a point of order with the person chairing a meeting. You kind of do it gently and you do it with respect. Right. It's like, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, or with respect. It seems to me that perhaps you've actually taken a position here, or that you've spoken 3 times on the substance of the matter. And I think you said earlier that we were not supposed to do that. So I'd just gently remind the chair of the rule that the chair themselves have imposed.
Well, I've been in some large meetings with 3,000 people, and somebody at the back of the room will yell, "Point of order!" And the chair then apparently has to stop every single thing that's going on and listen to this one person with whatever weird little issue they have.
Yeah, well, pretty much so. Yeah, which is why you don't want to misuse it. You'd better know what you're talking about. Because if you don't know what you're talking about and you just disrupt the meeting, that's a great way to make a lot of enemies and hear everybody. You know you're on the wrong side of that when you hear out of the mouths of 2,000 of the 3,000 people in the room. As soon as you hear
but yet if it's an issue that you're passionate about and it's a motion that you want to make sure passes or doesn't pass.
It's not a question of passion. I mean, that's the point about a point of order.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that's the point of a point of order is this. I mean, I feel like a Gilbert and Sullivan musical is about to break out here. It's not about your agreement or disagreement with substance. It's about trying to adhere to the spirit of and the letter of the rule that governs our the proper society, the proper rules that govern the discussion of a debate of things in our society. And by the way, the DPCA really has come on a long way in the last dozen years. I mean, there are things that we're doing now that are so much better than we were doing a dozen years ago. Mm-hmm. For example, alternating speeches for and against the motion.
Yes.
That's incredibly important. Yet we didn't used to do it. And I'm so pleased to see that it's become part of the culture that, we want to balance speeches for and against. Also, the idea that people who've spoken once should not be allowed to speak again until other people who want to speak can speak once. Mm. No one speaks twice until everybody speaks once, at least on one side of the issue. Mm-hmm. I mean, those things were not really values that were honored when I first encountered DPCA meetings, not because there was a lack of goodwill, but because people at that time didn't have that kind of inbuilt sense of how the rules were meant to be adopted. I've seen a huge amount of maturity develop in the organization in just the past decade.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got involved, I was surprised those sorts of things weren't there, because I've seen those as being common parts of debate in other organizations, and I just thought it was weird that Democrats abroad didn't have them.
Well, we've had some other things go wrong historically that I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to sort of relitigate the past, but there are some things that people routinely get wrong. For example, the definition of majority vote is one that often causes confusion.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. Do you guys? I move that we have a pop quiz. Can I ask you guys what majority vote means?
Majority vote. Oh well.
Yeah. What does it mean to pass by a majority?
50 plus 1.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. Imagine you have 100 members. Imagine the DPCA has 200 members.
Okay.
And 100 of them show up for a meeting.
Yes.
And a motion comes along, and there's not many people who feel strongly about it. So there's only 20 votes in favor and 15 votes against, and
everybody else in the room abstains.
Is that a majority? Does that pass by a majority?
No.
I was going to say yes.
Okay.
It does.
Because everyone was told there was a meeting. Half of them chose not to come. And I don't remember your numbers. But
well, you have a quorum.
Yeah.
You have a properly notified meeting.
Yeah.
The meeting is quorate. So long as you have a quorum, you can conduct business. So long as you're able to conduct business, you can pass a motion. To pass a motion means to pass by a majority vote. A majority vote is defined as there are more votes in favor than votes against. Abstentions do not count.
Right. Mentioned that you made a list of pet peeves, but I think you've only unloaded one or two off your chest. So I wanted to ask if there was another pet peeve you'd like to share.
I think I've got most of them that I had from my list. Points of information, and the misuse of a point of information is probably my top pet peeve, simply because it seems to recur a lot. Another one, which is just an understandable mistake, is misunderstanding majority. The number one mistake people make is they calculate majority as greater than 50% of all votes cast, including abstentions, but it's not. It's a majority of all votes excluding abstentions, so long as the body is quorate. One thing that came up recently in another context, though, that caused some confusion is the idea of whether or not the chair has a deciding vote, a so-called casting vote of a meeting. And the answer is technically they do not. The chair cannot vote twice. A presiding officer cannot vote twice. However, they do have a very special power that isn't very often exercised in my experience with DPCA, and that is the chair is not required to vote when the vote is called.
Oh.
They're not required to vote when the vote is called.
Wow.
But if the vote is called, and it looks like it's a tie, the chair can then say, well, I haven't voted up till now, but now I'm going to vote.
So does that mean, let's say it looked like it was a tie, and let's say it's a large number of people in the room. If the chair says, I haven't voted, but I'm going to vote on this side, does that end the question? Or do you have to actually count to make sure that the tie was...
If it were a tie, then it would go in favor. But if it were one short, the chair can actually vote to create a tie and block something from happening. Now, that's a bit theoretical in a DPCA context, because normally that would happen in a counted vote that's not a ballot.
Got it.
And we almost never do those.
Yeah.
The only ways, a counted vote that's not a ballot, something like a standing count, for example.
Well, we're talking about in person when it comes to that, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So you can't. So it doesn't make any sense on a voice vote. I mean, that makes no sense on a voice vote. And this particular weird rule that I just mentioned doesn't apply when you call a ballot. So if you have a ballot, if the chair wants to vote, they'd better put their ballot in.
Wow.
But realistically, that just hasn't been part of the culture or history of Democrats abroad. Chairs always typically, they either cast a vote or they don't vote.
Right.
So, but I only mention this because it came up as a point of confusion in another meeting a couple of weeks ago. Oh, well, in a committee meeting, the chair gets a casting vote. Answer: no, they don't.
And by that, they really mean that the chair should be allowed to vote twice. I mean, that's actually not something I've heard before.
Well, like I said, somebody kind of came up with it in a meeting, and I think they meant well, but it's not how it works.
It's not a thing.
Well, I think we see that too, where the chair casts the deciding vote if there happens to be a tie, which I also think is sort of invented on the spot.
Well, except I don't know where it's happened or how it's happened or when it's happened, but I would be very surprised if that's what was supposed to happen. I'm certainly not going to sit and second guess a meeting that you guys have been to that I don't have any knowledge of.
No, I don't have any. I don't have any memory of that.
I'll tell you one thing that I know has gone wrong in a meeting historically, and it was a very, very sad thing that went wrong as well, in my opinion. But it was early days, and this is something people don't realize. If you're voting for more than one open position, let's say if you're asking the body to fill like 3 positions,
right,
and you tell everybody vote 3 times, you can vote up to 3 times.
Right.
Well, when you give everybody 3 votes, you can have more than 3 people who end up with a majority of votes.
Yes.
This is a math thing.
I'm still just thinking through that one.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, this is a math thing. So if you have like 6 candidates and 3 open positions, and you tell everybody we have 3 vacancies, so everybody can vote up to 3 times. No more than 1 vote per candidate. You can't accumulate votes.
Right.
You can have 4 or 5 people all coming up with a majority when you tally the numbers. Yeah. And there was a very infamous case that happened more than a decade ago where people were trying to fill vacancies, and more majority votes came up than vacancies were available, and everyone freaked out.
Yeah.
And what the rules say, what you're supposed to do is you take the top vote getters. There's actually a rule that legislates for that. You take the top 3 people who get a majority. But what the people in the meeting did instead was they all freaked out and said, "Oh my heavens, that can't possibly be right because, numbers." So they reran. So they started over and ran the election again, and the results were different.
Oh no!
And it resulted in people who were supposed to have, who had properly been elected, not being seated.
Oh no! See, this is why ranked choice voting is probably something that needs more widespread use. But I know
I'm a fan.
Yeah. Having sat on the Nominations and Elections Committee for the global meeting in the last elections, I have a new appreciation for how intricate elections can be. You can't change the order. There were all sorts of considerations that I had never thought of.
Within DA UK, I was asked to come in at short notice in our annual meeting last year, which of course, because of COVID, we normally have these things face to face, but we had something like 500 people attending our online AGM. Yeah. We're a big country committee.
Yeah, wow.
I don't know if you know this, but it's a UK Canada thing.
Yeah,
Yay.
there we go.
It's a face-off, right?
Stop! We're not pursuing this line of discussion.
Okay, fair enough.
No, but
in this particular meeting I was called into, it's like we have 500 people in the meeting. We have chair and vice chair and secretary and treasurer vacancies to fill. We have 8 at-large seats for the XCOM to fill. We have to elect 22 voting representatives to the DPCA and a number of non-voting representatives to the DPCA, plus we have an election for our governing council. And everyone's wondering, why did that take 8 hours of meeting time? Yeah. Answer, because if you're going to conduct an election in this way, that's exactly how much time it's going to take. I mean, it's like, because every time you take a ballot, I mean, if you've seen the messiness of tabulating a large ballot.
Yep.
It's an eye opener.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's an eye opener. I'll never look at a public election the same again.
Right.
Because
and part of it with us is we add proxy votes and half votes into the whole thing.
What, in Canada, you mean?
DA.
Oh, DA, yeah. Well, the proxy situation
vote.
is a little easier to handle. I mean, handling proxies is a little easier.
It is and it isn't. Having sat on the NEC, I can tell you the proxies tied us in knots. Because trying to automate the vote, there's no software that calculates for you in the way that DA would require it to do. So,
Exactly.
Has to be done manually. Yep.
Well, and of course, and people, this isn't what they do every day, and they don't realize they're just used to seeing. Well, I assume that somewhere everybody pushes a button and then bing, the answer pops out 10 seconds later.
Not so
it's like
much.
No, there's a lot of manual intervention going on behind the scenes. So.
Yeah, we had like 3 practice sessions because it's so complex. It's unbelievable.
It is. Although, is this really about Roberts at this point, or are we now talking about
No, it isn't.
election?
And I'm still kind of, we're feeling a little chagrined by the 500 people who show up to your UK AGMs.
Well, it was a big meeting, no question about it. And more importantly, it was the first time we'd done it online. So we had so the size of the meeting was unprecedented, and the nature of the engagement was unprecedented.
Yeah.
So it was both of those things. And, frankly, I said to people, because we've been spending a lot of time figuring out how to revise our bylaws so we don't have to do that again.
Yep.
And I said, frankly, the miracle is that anybody stuck around for the meeting at all. It's like, because, what was the surprise wasn't that there were 500 people who showed up to vote for chair. The surprise was that there were still more than 300 or 350 at the end of the second session going to about midnight.
Unbelievable. Well,
that's dedication.
That certainly is. Canada revised our bylaws last year, and our AGM was nowhere near that protracted. So, just saying.
Good. No. Look. Hey, look. You don't have to preach to us. Our bylaws committee has been working diligently on this. Yeah. But like you, our biggest concern is where do you actually find a technology platform that can do the calculations that we need?
Yep.
You know, because it's really easy for decision makers to just like wave a magic wand and say, "Oh, there's an IT solution." Well, maybe there is. Maybe there isn't.
Yeah, exactly. So we're way beyond time, but the one.
So far beyond time.
It's okay.
Don't one of you?
It's okay,
isn't there one of you who wants to make a motion to adjourn? For heaven's sake!
I just have one question, and you might or might not have an answer for it.
Sure.
I'm just curious to know if I asked you what is the most ridiculous tangle or Robert's conundrum that you've ever seen a body get bogged down in, if anything comes to mind.
The most ridiculous conundrum. Well, it wouldn't have been this last meeting last summer. That was
doesn't have to be DA. Just
that was kind of an easy one.
Anybody.
Well, I got to tell you, most of my Roberts specific experiences with DA. Well, okay, I have seen outside of DA. I've seen an organization that just absolutely blew up because it couldn't handle properly. It had huge problems with a leadership election issue, and they just couldn't survive the tensions that resulted, and it was members of the board arguing with each other, threatening each other with lawsuits.
No.
You know, all sorts of stuff. And that, you know, that was a voluntary society as well.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's a real shame when people are trying to focus on a mission and it all gets caught up in that kind of distraction.
Right.
Beyond that, I'm trying to think what's the...
I was just thinking, wondering if you had any fishing tales, basically.
Well, I've got plenty of fishing tales, but I'm not sure how many of them I can tell. Because some of these things, my day job, I'm a lawyer, and sometimes I hit these kinds of issues in the course of my legal practice. So I'm trying to filter through what I can talk about and what I can't.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. So you know, the nice thing about DA is that, broadly speaking, people are trying hard to achieve a mission. And the times that I see things go wrong is when people forget the basics. Mm-hmm. You know, the basics, like this is a deliberative body and you have to bring the body with you. The number one way for a meeting to go wrong is you get somebody, and I've seen this happen at a DA UK meeting once or twice, at an election meeting once many, many years ago, where someone decides they're just going to set themselves up as the authority, and by God, I'm the chair, and I'm telling you how it is, and people don't like that.
Right.
You know, if you lose that connection, if you lose that bond with the people in the meeting, things start to go bad quickly, and you start hearing more points of order and points of information and points of inquiry, and why are you doing that? And I don't agree, and that's not proper. I mean, and so my usual advice to people who are chairing a meeting like this is let the room work for you. Let the room work for you. Let the room do the work. So if you've got, you know, one person off in the corner, and everybody in DA has this story, you know, it's it's Mr. Difficult, who just flew in from I don't know where, and I hope they go back soon. and they've decided they want to make every objection. They want to do everything. They're just like really, you know, poisoning the water. Mm-hmm. As soon as you start to it's hard. It's easier to do this in person than online. But when you start to sense that people are squirming in their seats, you know, you don't have to rule the person out of order. You don't have to land on them like a ton of the bricks. Wait for somebody else to get annoyed, you know, and say, you know, is this, you know, it's like, it's like, Mr. Chairman, can we please get back to our agenda? Why are we talking about this? And it's like, and everyone goes, oh, yeah, right. I mean, you know, I it's not exactly a mob mentality, but, you know, let the room work for you. Lean into the spirit of the room. Let the spirit of the room pull you forward. And if the spirit of the room is, you know, I know you wanted to talk about this, but we want to talk about something else. Whenever I chair a meeting, I always take the view, it's like, oh, you want to talk about something else? Fine. Well, that's your right. Let's amend. Let's do that, and we will get to the point you want to raise, because I'm not going to stand in front of this tsunami. It's like I'm one person. Yeah, you elected me to do this thing. I was chair of Democrats Abroad UK for 4 years, and I stood up in front of our meetings more than once. And sometimes people just want to talk about stuff, and you spend a lot of time thinking about, well, I want to spend this much time on this and that much time on the other. Well, the members have their own views about what they want to spend time on, and it's like, okay, all right, well, or we could do that. Let's just lean in and see where we get to.
That's
so
great.
Yeah.
Well, Rob Carolina, thank you so much for joining us today and shining all kinds of light on Robert's rules.
My pleasure.
I'm Rachel Oigster with David Schellenberg in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for listening to Democrats Abroad, the Blue Vote Cafe.